Good morning. Let us start. Guten Morgen, liebe Gäste, liebe vor allen Dingen Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer, die uns digital zugeschaltet sind und auch die Referentinnen und Referenten. Einer davon sitzt schon hier vorne. Neben mir hat Platz genommen der Vorsitzende des Regionalausschusses, unser Mitglied der linken Fraktion Yunus Omagé. Herzlich willkommen. Ich bin Martina Michels, auch Europaabgeordnete und komme von den deutschen Linken. Ich bin gleichzeitig die Koordinatorin der Linken im Regionalausschuss. Ich werde Sie zumindest erstmal durch den ersten Teil unserer Veranstaltung, unseres Panels führen. Als die EU-Kommission am 9. Februar 2022 den 8. Kohäsionsbericht vorlegte, geschah dies mit vorsichtigem Optimismus, aber dennoch eben Optimismus. Die Corona-Krise hatte zwar in der EU schwerwiegende wirtschaftliche Auswirkungen und führte zu der größten Rezession seit 1945. Dank des raschen, flexiblen Einsatzes, das muss man anerkennen, auch von EU-Strukturfondsgeldern, konnten dennoch im Vergleich zu anderen Krisen und im Durchschnitt ein massiver Anstieg von Arbeitslosigkeit und Unternehmerinsolvenzen zum Teil verhindert werden. In der Hoffnung auf ein baldiges Ende der Pandemie sollten einige Sonderregelungen, die wir in Windeseile und in großer Einigkeit im Regionalausschuss vorbereitet haben, die dann im Plenum verabschiedet wurden, sollten diese Sonderregelungen verlängert werden, um notwendige Investitionen wieder anzukurbeln, die öffentlichen Haushalte zu entlasten und Projekte zu beschleunigen. Klimaschutz und Digitalisierung als strategische aktuelle Ziele sollten damit verstärkt werden und ebenfalls zum Aufschwung beitragen. Soziale Ungleichheiten und Armutsgefährdung waren in der Corona-Krise zwar wieder gewachsen, doch immerhin war das Problembewusstsein gestärkt worden. Der Kohäsionsbericht hebt die sozialen Herausforderungen sehr deutlich hervor. Da geht es um regionale Unterschiede zwischen dem Norden und dem Süden beziehungsweise dem Osten der EU, zwischen Stadt und Land und sogenannten Randgebieten, zwischen den Geschlechtern, zwischen gut und weniger gut ausgebildeten Menschen mit und ohne unmittelbaren Migrationshintergrund und mit unterschiedlichen Startchancen. Bei allem nötigen Strukturwandel sollte dies nun auch beachtet werden. Doch bereits damals, im vergangenen Winter, verdoppelten sich die Preise für Gas und Strom akut. Bereits vor Corona war, das muss man immer wieder deutlich sagen, Energiearmut ein ernsthafter Faktor beim Armutsrisiko insgesamt. Aktuell befinden wir uns nun mitten in einer Krise, deren Verlauf und Ende nicht absehbar ist. Eine Krise, die soziale und wirtschaftliche Folgen haben könnte, deren Sprengkraft noch gar nicht hoch eingeschätzt werden können. Eine Krise, in der die Klimakrise nun vielen als nebensächlich erscheint. Der 8. Kohäsionsbericht wäre in normaleren Zeiten sozusagen der erste Auftakt für die Debatte um die Zukunft der Kohäsionspolitik nach 2027 gewesen. Und das, obwohl er selbst noch wenig konkrete Vorstellungen der EU-Kommission dazu enthält. Nun sind die Fragen wohl aber dringender, akuter und doch auch grundsätzlicher geworden. Kann unsere Regionalförderpolitik, so wie wir sie für 2021 bis 2027 konzipiert haben, ihre Aufgaben noch erfüllen? Reichen die Krisenpakete aus, um akuten Anpassungsbedarf zu erfüllen? Sind sie vielleicht eher kontraproduktiv, weil sie die langfristige strategische Ausrichtung durcheinander bringen? Oder die Frage, wie müssen wir andere Politiken und die Kohäsionspolitik zusammenbringen, miteinander verbinden, neu zusammendenken, um diese schwerste bisher vorstellbare Krise zu bestehen? Diese Fragen werden wir heute natürlich nicht abschließend beantworten, aber wir werden sie diskutieren. Wir haben heute Gäste, die uns einige der wichtigsten Themen und Anforderungen mitgeben können, die wir als Linksfraktion im Europaparlament weiterhin oder vielleicht auch neu voranbringen werden. Ich freue mich daher sehr, unsere ersten beiden Rednerinnen und Redner anzukündigen. Da ist zum einen uns aus London zugeschaltet Frau Dr. Vera Wegmann. Sie ist Forscherin an der Universität in Greenwich. Sie ist Autorin des Berichts Going Public. Dort vertrat sie bereits 2019 die These, die Liberalisierung des Energiesystems hat nur wenige Antworten auf die fortschreitende Klimakrise geliefert. Die weit verbreitete Nutzung praktikabler Alternativen zu Kohlenstoff emittierenden Energiequellen wurde größtenteils mithilfe beträchtlicher öffentlicher Subventionen und nicht durch freien Marktwettbewerb erreicht. Ohne Ablehnung des aktuellen Modells des Energiesystems in Europa sei es weder möglich, das Pariser Abkommen zu erfüllen, noch saubere, erschwingliche Energie und demokratische Kontrolle für die Menschen zu liefern. Soweit Ihr Zitat. Sie wird darauf sicherlich viel näher eingehen. Ich freue mich auf Ihre Erläuterungen und Einschätzungen zur aktuellen Energiekrise und natürlich auch auf Vorschläge, was von uns als parlamentarischer Linke dabei dringend getan werden müsste. Neben mir bereits Platz genommen hat Herr Rolf Gehring. Wir haben ihn eingeladen als Vertreter der Europäischen Vereinigung der Bau- und Holzarbeiter. In dieser Funktion sitzt er auch im Beratungsgremium für industriellen Wandel im Europäischen Wirtschafts- und Sozialausschuss. Er wird uns die Einschätzung der europäischen Gewerkschaften zur Kohäsionspolitik und zu den wichtigsten Herausforderungen der aktuellen Krise mit auf den Weg geben. Wir werden dann in einem zweiten Panel sowohl aus der Kommunalebene als auch aus den europäischen Regionen Stimmen hören. Technisch muss ich noch ein paar kleine Hinweise geben. Wir haben Übersetzungen für Englisch, Deutsch, Französisch, Griechisch und Spanisch, haben jedoch nur für die Rednerinnen hier im Raum diese Übersetzung. Die online zugeschalteten Redner möchte ich daher bitten, Englisch zu sprechen, sodass dies dann auch zugänglich ist für alle. Sie sind zweitens herzlich eingeladen, sich per Chat oder hier im Saal an der Diskussion zu beteiligen. Im Sinne der Datenschutzbestimmungen weise ich in diesem Zusammenhang noch mal darauf hin, dass diese Veranstaltung online übertragen und aufgezeichnet wird. Da Frau Wegmann sich in Kürze auf den Weg zum Flughafen machen muss, übergebe ich hiermit ihr unverzüglich das Wort und freue mich auf Ihren Beitrag. Frau Dr. Wegmann, Sie haben das Wort. Und wir hoffen, das klappt.
Das hoffe ich auch. Yeah, thank you everybody for the introduction, especially to Michaela Michels. Like she already said, I'm gonna speak in English. I'm German originally, just to be clear about this, but also because of the translation, also because I published the reports I'm gonna speak about in English. So yeah, we already covered that. I'm from the University of Greenwich, from the Research Center Public Services International Research Unit. So the next slide, please. So I'm going to present some research findings from two studies. One, which Michaela already mentioned, is the one from 2019. So it's you might think it's already outdated, but unfortunately it's not. I'm just going to put my timer on so that I don't talk too long. So this study very much, and maybe we can go to the next slide already, covers like an overview of the liberalization policies of the EU energy market in the EU, and really provides an evaluate like the literature on energy liberalization, from a critical angle. and see what exactly were the outcomes, and then think about alternative policy proposals. So this study was commissioned for the trade unions, so EPSU, the European Public Service Union. And then next slide, please. Then I'm also presenting here about energy and specifically energy poverty, as we already heard about from Michaela, that it's a big theme, of course, at the moment. And this study will come out at the end of the year. It has the preliminary title of Heating for Everyone and the Causes of Fuel Poverty and How We Can Overcome It. And the aim of this particular study is to shed light on the current energy crisis in Europe, but also really look at inequalities within that crisis, and again look for alternative policy proposals. So this talk here is very much, I mean, you probably noticed this already, about energy, and I will take the regional inequalities into consideration, but I will put this in the broader context of the current crisis and the energy market as a whole. So next slide, please. So we're stepping back slightly and just thinking about the context now. So we can say that the whole aim of energy liberalization was the idea that we would create an integrated single European energy market, and that eventually that would lead to lower prices for the consumer. So why was this the belief? The belief was that competition would tend to drive out inefficiencies in the market, and particularly get rid of what is not competitive, and end the big monopolies of state-owned enterprises, and therefore drive down prices. So that was the whole idea. Next slide, please. However, now that we have assessed it for some decades already, we can say that this was obviously not the case. So what we can see is that we have higher prices for the consumers, and we also see that, the market actually wasn't more competitive and didn't get rid of monopolies. Quite the opposite. We saw further and further market concentration of big companies. And these big energy multinational companies failed in many ways for environmental and social reasons. We didn't help in bringing in more renewable energy. And further in a bit. So next slide, please. So what happened, and this is important if we think about the current crisis, we need to think about what happened to renewable energies and why we don't have more of them right now. So what we can see is that renewable energies really depend on public protection, and this is unfortunately not much known. So we can see that, renewable energies require investment, large amounts of investment. And for that to work, the European Commission actually even saw that we had to protect the renewable energies from the market. So there were a lot of subsidies mechanism, and if you're interested in this further, please go to the report, because there's like a detailed analysis of the different subsidies. And what we can see is that even though there were some subsidies and so on, it only worked because they were protected from the market, but still investment levels in renewables have fallen, and this quite dramatically. And now that these subsidies are phased out, the investment levels will fall even further, which is like a big problem. And we can also see that there is more and more research showing that it's through public investments that there has been private investment. So the private investment didn't come out of nothing. It was only because the public investment created the security of the market. So that's very important to consider. Next slide, please. So when we think about like the current energy crisis, I guess it's known to everybody by now that Europe is still depending a lot on fossil fuels. Yes, there has been a lot of talk about increases of renewable energy, and However, the important point is there that we also had an increase of on demand for energy generally. So it's not actually that the share is going up, it's like an expansion of renewable energy. However, Europe is still very much dependent on fossil fuels, as we see now in this crisis. It is a problem. And there we see very different regional variations. So while in the EU, on average, it's 35% of the total energy production, which is still coming from gas and oil and coal. We can see that this varies across the region. So while Sweden and France and Luxembourg have their fossil fuels have a more marginal share, we also have other areas where 60% of the majority of the total production is depending on energy production is built on fossil fuels. So for example, in the Netherlands, Poland and Cyprus. So now that wholesale market prices are going up, we see that this really matters a lot. And also, of course, especially post-pandemic, we see that energy consumption is going up in Europe generally, even though we also have to consider that a lot of our energy is not accounted for in the EU because our generally production is going down as we are as a lot of the global goods are produced elsewhere. So this is also something we need to take into consideration, the deindustrialization of Europe and when we talk about energy. Next slide, please. So I already touched a little bit on the environmental crisis in energy, and this is important to remember that yes, energy over half of our green gas emissions in Europe is coming from energy production industries in Europe. However, I want to focus more in this talk now, because I don't have too much time, to talk about the social crisis of energy, energy poverty, as it was already mentioned earlier. So the next slide, please. So, like Michaela Michels already said, we have a huge problem of energy poverty in Europe. And it's interesting. I mean, when we say huge problem, an academic like me is like, okay, how big is the problem? We want to know. However, we don't really have proper estimates about it. So we can say in 2020, the European Parliament, a study and so on, said it's about 36 million Europeans who couldn't adequately warm their home. However, because we have two different indicators we're dealing with, we can actually say that in reality it's likely to be much higher. So a study commissioned by the European Commission in 2018, so that was before the pandemic, it was before the energy crisis, estimated it's 50 million people in Europe who are living in energy poverty. And of course, now with the pandemic and with the energy crisis, this went up significantly. Another thing to remember when we talk about energy poverty is that often, people like me from Germany and maybe also people who are sitting in Brussels right now and the winter is coming, we're thinking about people not being able to warm their home and essentially dying of being cold. However, we also have the opposite problem of people not being able to sufficiently cooling their homes. So this is, for example, in Spain and many southern regions, we see that there are big problems in that regard, and this is also a form of energy poverty, of course. So in Spain, more people died prematurely due to energy poverty and overheating than in car accidents. So it's a very big risk, and old figures, and I'm working currently on new figures, but old figures already before the pandemic already suggested that every fourth household in Spain cannot afford to cool their homes enough during the summer. Yes, I already covered that. Of course, in the pandemic, we see this like an increase because people need to spend more time at home and rely on more like energy spent in their homes during the lockdowns, and therefore it's very important that many countries introduced like protection for people who couldn't afford to pay their energy bills. And this was first done in Spain and Italy, but then also by other countries. And of course, I already mentioned the energy crisis, that now energy poverty is going up significantly because of the Russian invasion in the Ukraine. Next slide, please. So just for our conversation today, I thought it's very important to just briefly mention the regional inequalities of energy poverty. So the studies to date, and there are quite a few studies covering that, we can map out like 3 different trends. So we see that Central and Eastern European countries are actually most affected from energy poverty, and mainly because of the housing stock and like the way the housing is not properly insulated. We then see that in the Southern and Mediterranean region, we see a lot of the impact of austerity and how this had an impact of energy on energy poverty and generally, and of course also the precarity of like living conditions generally. And then in Northwest Europe, we see, yes, generally the Northwest Europe is less affected, with some big exceptions like the UK. However, there we also see that there are a lot of inequalities within society, and with who's suffering and who's not suffering. So just to give you some examples, so from the EU's domestic energy poverty index, which I already mentioned, we can see that Bulgaria, Hungary and Slovakia are like the most affected countries of energy poverty. However, we also see that other Mediterranean countries are very affected. For example, a recent study by the ETUC did the research that in Greece, actually, if you are earning the minimum wage, you need to work for 2 months, like 2 months of your wage is needed to cover your annual energy supplies. So that's obviously a lot. And in the UK, we can see the UK is most affected in Western Europe, and this is like an increasing problem at the moment, and we will see what this winter brings. Within the regional inequalities, I just mentioned this very briefly because it's not the aim of this talk today, but we really need to think about the inequalities within society. So when we think about income inequalities, gender, but also we can see like the racial dimension of energy poverty, and there are a lot of studies on that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I don't have a lot of time. I have like 1 minute left, so I'm just going to rush through this, and maybe even make this my last slide. So the better public alternative is what I'm proposing in studies, and I go in more detail on that, how we can achieve a public alternative. But first I want to just mention why we need a better public alternative. And this is really because we need to be able to control our energy system. If we cannot control it, we cannot decarbonize it, and we can also not guarantee in the same time for security of supply and affordability. So we need all of this. So in the reports, I outline a lot that this doesn't necessarily mean to go back to a big national centralized ways of structuring the energy system, even though it can mean that. So I outline in a bit more detail like how it can be done. Next slide, please. So in the reports, I show that if we think about the energy system, we have to think about it holistically. It doesn't make sense to only think about parts of it. So, and what does it mean holistically? It means that we need to think about the grid, so transmission and distribution, as well as supply and generation. And only when we tackle all of this together, we will also be able to tackle energy poverty. Next slide, please. And the next slide, because I don't have time for that. And the next slide, please. And the next slide. Yes, so I just want to end on like one nice comparison between France and the UK. So in many ways similar countries, in many ways very different countries. However, when it comes to energy, so France recently brought the EDF into complete public ownership. Large part of the EDF were already in public ownership, but it decided that now, during the energy crisis, France needs to control the energy system even more, so it brought it completely into public ownership. And this enabled France to actually protect its citizens from more so from the effects of the energy crisis. So in the UK, studies by us and other researchers showed that actually energy prices are 10 to 20% higher than they would be without having a privatized system. And in the UK is one of the UK is the only country except from Portugal, which is due to bailout. There were some. Forget Portugal at the moment, but the UK is the only country in Europe which completely privatized the energy grid by its own choice. And everything else, the supplier and so on, are also privatized. So if without privatization, the energy prices would be 10 to 20% lower, our studies show. In France, that the EDF is in public ownership, now managed to only increase energy bills by 4% in April 22. And this is a big contrast to the UK, where it went up to by 54%, the energy prices went up. So we can see already on this example what public ownership can achieve. How it can be achieved, I go into more details in these studies. So I conclude here with the next slide. Well, actually, second last slide. I just also want to say that public ownership is not the only way to solve the energy problem. However, it's very important. So my conclusion is that public institutions are much better equipped to solve, energy poverty, but also the climate change crisis we have as well. And that if we want to do it, we need to do it in a holistic manner to achieve public ownership. So this includes transmission, distribution, as well as supply, and as well as of generation of energy. And thereby I also make the distinction between green and not so green energy, and that actually it's important to have public control over both. I stop here. I probably have around, if there are questions for me, I don't know, please put them in the chat. I probably have around 5 minutes before I unfortunately need to go, but I would love to stay in touch and email me if there are any questions. Thank you very much, and I hope I didn't speak too fast. Thank you.
Thank you for this very interesting statement. And I have the question to the participants. Have you questions directly? Then you can, and you give the floor. Then I can give you the floor. I need a signal from technical support. Nobody in this time, okay. Then my proposal is then we are going to the next guest. It is Mr. Gehring, because we don't know if the Rüdiger Lötzer, he is not in the floor. Okay, he is. We are starting with Mr. Gehring, okay, or what? Here is Mr. Lötzer. A warm welcome. And now you have from the regent. You have the floor. Please start. Was denn jetzt? Er war doch schon drin.
is in the panel.
I'm still here. I think, I hope I can handle it. Do you hear me?
On the panel too.
You can speak.
Thank you very much for the invitation and best greetings from a little bit rainy Berlin to Brussels. I've been asked to speak to you about the cohesion policy of the European Union from a local perspective. And therefore, I have made some papers. I don't know whether they can be shown to you. I'm not a technical expert about how to handle these papers. Do you hear me?
Yes, we have a little misunderstanding in a REGI
There it
plan.
is.
And I have to ask our... yes, the proposal is that now at first Mr. Gehring is speaking and you are planned in a second panel. Excuse me, it
No
was
problem.
here a misunderstanding. Okay, we see us later and now Herr Gehring, Sie haben das Wort.
Okay, is that working? The micro? Okay, very good. Dear Mr. Lötzer, I feel so sorry for you, but obviously it's first me, so he will understand. I know him. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting. It's not a hearing. I think it's more a meeting to see what is the stock in our positions, in our policies, what are the overall aims in times of crisis, but with relation to the existing funds, which are structural funds, traditionally focusing a bit on the, let's say, more long-lasting economic activities and its social effects. My name, as said, is Rolf Gehring. I'm working for the European Federation of Building and Woodworkers here in Brussels. Is one out of 7 trade unions, sectorial trade unions, and we are all member of the European Trade Union Confederation, so there is a very strong link. But, and I will come back to that a bit later, there is also some competition when we talk about these funds and its use and the perspectives in our policies, because we are not only representing different sectors, but also different interests of workers. This is not a presentation with clear advice and clear orientations. It is more work in progress, I would say. I will come back to that a bit later. It has 4 parts. One is a very, very general first slide, then 2-3 slides about our ways of dealing with the overall topic. A 4th part is then dealing with European social dialogue, because when we talk about the use of these funds and the economic and social development, we are in the core area of industrial relations and what we as trade unions negotiate or fight with employer federations or companies. And then the last part, the 4th part, is a bit more specific and concrete, looking on what we as EFBWW are doing in this field and how we are doing that. So I'm starting with slide number 1. is very general, as said, and it is taken from a recent publication from the ETUC. Vera was also referring to this publication. So unions welcome the overall aim of the structural and cohesion funds because it is to minimize economic imbalance in Europe and to provide or to foster economic and social cohesion and equal living standards. So that is a very good, and it is in the treaty. I think we should, as left-wingers, we should underline that also when it comes to the next election campaigns. So there is something on EU level we can and maybe we have to defend. The ETUC is very much focusing on the structural organization and the trade union rights within this organization. Therefore, a few points I took out from this paper. Social partners have to be consulted in all social policy matters and in all programming as well. And better participation should be organized at all levels. That means on the European level in the policy planning, but then on the local or regional level in all aspects of these funds, in its use, the implementation, but also the access to these funds should be improved or facilitated. I think that's a very important thing, because we have a lot of activities on the European level which never reach the local level or the people they are directed to. I take another example that comes from our main activities when it comes to industrial relation and health and safety law, for example, health and safety at workplaces. You have a lot of public consultations. And I think our colleagues on company level, in works councils, in European works councils, they have the knowledge about the topic. Why? And it is also a question towards us, how can we mobilize them? How can we get the message across about what exists or what is happening on European level? Then the last point here, when preparing this little presentation, of course, I had a look on the web pages of the industry federations, ETUC and so on, and there is extremely little documents directly dealing with the topic. The related topics, the crisis, energy crisis, the pandemic and so on, you find, of course, a lot. But in relation to the cohesion and structural funds, there is not much. What is the general policy of trade unions in this area is on the next slide. And one could say it is a bit the traditional way, the conservative way, that trade unions fight for the existing economic structures, preventing workplaces and industry in phases of crisis. And I said we are the European Federation of Building and Woodworkers, and building includes building materials. Building materials, you know immediately, it can be wood, tiles, concrete. And concrete production is enormous in terms of CO2 emissions. The cement sector is one of the worst ones. So what do? We defend the workplaces there, and we say, oh yeah, the cement industry also intends to become green. So is that realistic? I mean, you see, there is also competition, and there are some problems for trade unions when defending existing industries, structures, workplaces, of course. The next slide. Yeah. On the other hand, existing industrial and other economic activities are fundamental and enshrined in the respective regions, one could say in the regional economies, and are also fundamental for its economic potentials. So what does it mean? That means the main economic activity is circular economy. You do tomorrow what you do today and the day after, because it is successful, there is a market and so on. Transition, permanent transition, is impossible. And also the, let's say, economic background, what is possible in a region, that needs to be considered. And I think that is a first point where I would like to have closer collaboration, or closer collaboration and coordination of discussions within the political groups, within trade unions, maybe also with the, not maybe, also with the employers, and then with people from regional level. I think for Greece, for example, we had all the fights and clashes with the austerity policy and all the negative impacts in this society and also its economy. On the other hand, whom of us is able to say what is right for the Greek economy, how we should use the structural funds there to guarantee that we have lasting and successful economical processes in the future. You have to sit together. So I'll come back to that later. The actual actions are more focused on obvious and current problems. So all was named already: energy crisis, we had the pandemic, we have the transition of some economies, we have crisis of the steel industry, and a lot of other developments we could cite as crises. There is a number of crises, and the problem here is that we need to see the limitations and take political decisions on what is now first and foremost to do and what is of less importance. Next slide, please. The last slide was a bit the conservative way of trade union action in this field, preventing existing structures, but we have also, of course, a lot of ideas regarding how to use the means from the funds and what are core. So investment for jobs and growth is welcomed. That is what the Commission always also underlines and says, and therefore it is again decisive. What does it mean concrete? One major focus is fair and regulated forms of employment, and that is really crucial because what we see on European labor market, especially but not only in the construction sector, is not far from modern slavery in some aspects. So we are very much fighting that all measures, we have the fund for just transition, but here that is more. We welcome the ELA, the establishment of the European Labour Authority. That's clear that we welcome that, but it is understaffed and we need much more ambitious goals for this institution, because without regulated forms of employment and also working conditions, sound working conditions, payments and so on, it is never sustainable, the economic development. So that is crucial. Working conditions and research, that is also of high importance. I will not start to go into the detail, but everyone talks about digitalization and robotization. But it is not an entity in itself. So the digital tools needs to be developed, and that is not just a technological process, it is also a social process. We need to develop technology. For example, in the chip production, you have continuous production from Monday to Sunday night, so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you ask, that is reality, is not new, but it is reality. There was a researcher hired by IG Metall, and he was asked to explain a bit why we need a work-free weekend and social cultural heritage of our societies. And he moved to Fraunhofer Institute and asked the engineers why you have not tried to design the technology that you go down on Friday and then up again on Monday. And he said that's not a joke. He said he needed 3 days to explain to the researchers what his question is about. So you see, the engineer is not necessarily aware of social needs and social problems at workplaces. We need to be better in using the Horizon 2020, I think, no, Horizon, it's just Horizon now, this research and development program for social needs, and we need the links. And I think you, Martina, and also Vera, you were talking about holistic approaches or consistent policies. So I miss these links between those programs. The next slide, please. What is the next slide talking about? Perspectives, yeah. Another focus of trade union action is training. That's true. Again, it is always specific, because digitalization again is different from forest management to automotive industry, or in the furniture sector, or in schools, or wherever. So the training is always specific, and we did something that was jointly with the employers. We asked, for example, digitalization, what does it mean for the furniture sector in the next 10 years? And we had some scenario of business models, and then we were in depth asking what new skills do you expect or do you need? And then what does it mean for possible new health and safety risks or for health and safety risk in general. So I think that is a specific contribution from unions, if it runs well, as for us, then with the employers, otherwise for unions themselves. A just transition is core in current debates and union demands. That is the whole debate around the just transition, the related fund, but also what I was referring to earlier, forms of employment and other aspects. Energy transition is now very much in our focus. I think that is for all trade unions, the one or the other way. I will come back to that when talking about EFBWW. And then is more a question to you. I don't have the answer. Some other trade unionists may have the answer. I don't have it. Transition also means that we go to new materials. A simple thing is wind turbines. We are in favor. The basis is concrete. The basis is concrete, but there are technological alternatives. We know that wooden structures can go up to 200-meter height, and if there is some problems, for example, if they burn, wood burns in a structured way. You know as a firefighter what you can do, and you can do something. Concrete is more difficult, and steel that is stable for a while, but then it collapses in once, and you don't know about the date. So new materials, that is new raw material, I should say. That is a very important thing. But where it comes from and where do we produce it, that is a bit the question mark, because I don't think that the European economy can go back to a regional sustainable economy with circularity, without international relations and without a global market. Not in all activities, but in many. Next slide, please. A little one regarding social dialogue, because that is a bit on European level. I will not talk too much about that, but on European level, you cannot force the employers. You don't have the company level where you fight and where you have the struggles and you come to collective agreements. On European level, you meet those who believe in social dialogue, who are there voluntarily. And we all know that when we talk about employer or the capitalist class, so it is an economic function, but you meet a wide range of people there. Many of them are humanists, and you can do a lot with them. So we try, and we have 43 sectorial social dialogues on European level, and then the cross-sectorial one with ETUC and the 3 employer federations. So from my point of view, when we talk about today's topic, relatively little is done in sectorial social dialogues. The focus is preservation of existing economic structures. For example, Sembureau, the organization of the cement producers, they are now very interested in a dialogue with us to get us on board to protect the economy. So, and our workers there, of course, they also welcome that. And what I experienced in the CCMI is here the last point. It's a Comité consultatif pour la mutation de l'industrie, is a committee within the Economic and Social Committee, and you have the 3 groups there in this group, and that is on industrial change. So they work with opinions, and their opinions are, I think, at least also read by the European Commission when preparing policy documents, so there is some influence. And I've never seen so many employers asking for subsidies. Independently on the sector, each sector says, we are very important, we need subsidies. So that's a bit of a problem. Some changes in connection with digitalization and robotics. Some changes means here that we have more activities in the social dialogue thinking on these 2 aspects. It is a technological change, but also doing something in this respect. I was referring to our action for the furniture sector. Knowing what skills are needed in the future are very important. I will not talk about another aspect, but it is for us as trade unions extremely important. The European Commission gives always the impression that we have technological change and we have needed skills and a skills gap because you don't find these skills on the labor market. But that is not true. The technology, I already said, is designed. You can influence the design. How you implement the technology on company level, that is an open question. And how you use it is also an open question. That means the work organization and which skills are finally needed is also a question that is decided by social partners. So, and there we have some positive developments. Change means here it is more a topic for the social dialogue. A greening and circular economy as drivers, greening and circular, that is a bit a question mark, because sometimes I think we are still busy with paving the path towards greening, towards circularity, and the effects are not easy to estimate. So there will be limitations. Yeah, I was already talking about this CCMI, and therefore, could you go to the next slide, please? That is not the last, but second, and is a bit about our EFBWW activities in this field in a broad sense. So we think that this strategic autonomy is we have to deal carefully with it, and it is not that easy. It is maybe not the worst, but it affects the international economy, and it affects also the international economy for other countries. So being independent from Russia for the moment, absolutely good, right? But in principle, it has an effect for development countries and other countries as well. Energy efficiency in buildings is a very important aspect. Vera was touching that. 60% of all emissions coming from housing. I don't know by heart now what is the production of housing and then the use, or the construction of houses and then the use. But it is very, very difficult. And the EU is promising, from my point of view, too much. So we have some goals regarding the energy efficiency in buildings, and that would mean that we have 3 to 4% of the whole building stock every year renovated, every year. The real figure is, over the last years, around 1%, maybe a bit more. And experts say if you take those who are renovated, only 0.2%, a fifth of the renovated one, is what they call deep renovation. That means after the renovation, the house is going towards zero emission. So if we keep this pace, then we need 100, 150 years to have all houses renovated. Additionally, we have material problems, and we also have problems having the workforce, the labor doing this work. In construction, you everywhere in Europe you find companies saying we have a lack of workforce for the moment. So some goals are nice, but maybe not realistic. And then we also need a holistic approach. And here it's maybe a question, a request towards you. Energy efficiency in building plays a very big role, and I don't know precisely if these funds are finally used. I think so, the regional funds. We have this asbestos problem. We still have millions of buildings in Europe containing asbestos, and the Commission is not willing to take this problem on board in its energy performance in buildings directive. There is a mentioning in one of the recitals, but that is too little. What we need is really, and the EP has an asbestos report, everything is written in it, what we need. We need a program for all European countries to remove asbestos, because otherwise we have repercussions on health of people, on the health system, and so on. So we have this European Beating Cancer Plan. I'm not sure whether it talks about asbestos, but it is a real threat, also when renovating, that's clear, but we have to remove this asbestos, and that could be a very specific aim here. New materials in the woodwork sector and the need of sufficient raw material. Raw material, if we use the wood as a renewable raw material, and one you can use in many applications in many sectors. The wood employers did a very nice poster where they count all the industry and say for what use, for what wood or other parts of the tree can be used. And that is impressive. But at a certain moment, we will be confronted with the lack of this raw material. So last slide, please. I come back to the problem of the raw material at the very end, but here, that is our policy. We always say that our sectors, the woodworking sectors, they are tailor-made for the rural development, because you have the woods, you have close to the woods the sawmills, you can place other wood processing industries there, panel industry or pocket industry or whatever, and traditionally it is this way. So, and there we say that a focus in the rural development could be to foster this structure. We have an alliance on European level. It's called Wood for Bauhaus, and it is focusing on the use of wood in construction in relation to the new Bauhaus initiative of the European Commission. And then the circularity and the cascade use of wood shall be guiding principle for the use of wood as a raw material. So that is disputed between the various fractions of the woodworking employers, the guys from the sawmills who today also produce energy from wood, because it is not only the large scale, you can do it on a very small scale, and therefore more and more sawmills have additionally to the sawing job these little structures to produce energy from wood already. The panel industry is absolutely in favor of the cascade use of wood, the sawmill not. So you have different views. For us as EFBWW, this cascade use of wood is very important. And the last point where we put a lot of focus on is sustainable forest management. That is absolutely needed to, with view on biodiversity, but also with view on wood as a raw material. So I come back to this point. We have half a minute. We have less forest fires in Europe in tendency, but the single forest fire is much bigger. And one figure is from Canada, I know. In Canada was a very big forest fire 4 or 5 years ago, and that emitted 3 times the CO2 emissions, which is Canada as a whole country emitting over the year. If we don't get these forest fires stopping, then we can do whatever we like in reducing CO2. It will be countered by these forest fires. So, and I talked about that with people from GUE NGL a few years ago, other name. We need an initiative for a better task force to fight forest fires. There is a European task force, but that is absolutely understaffed. So that could be also a very specific but practical approach. I would appreciate very much, I have not talked about that, but we have this collaboration with others. We are also member of Right to Energy network and the Renovate Europe network. We talk with the employers, but what we haven't done not that much in the past is talking with the political groups. And I would appreciate if we could start something like a continuous exchange on as specific as possible topics. Sorry.
Thank you very much for your interesting statement, and it was powerful mix of proposals and experience. And now I have the question on public viewer, on the participants. Who has questions or remarks? Then you can do it now. Yes, Mr. Omarjee.
Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation qui était tout à fait, vous comprenez le français, oui, voilà, qui était vraiment tout à fait intéressante. Je veux apporter en point de complément pour ne pas laisser sans réponse un certain nombre de questions que vous avez posées, bien que, évidemment, je partage tout ce que vous avez dit sur les difficultés pour atteindre les ambitions. Mais nous avons d'ores et déjà, enfin je prends ma casquette de président de la commission REGI, nous avons d'ores et déjà pris le chemin du verdissement en réalité de la politique de cohésion, peut-être plus que les autres politiques. Et d'ailleurs, le groupe The Left a pesé dans la négociation avec le groupe des Verts pour que l'on fixe une ambition de 30% minimum des investissements de la cohésion vers les objectifs environnementaux et pour respecter les accords de Paris. Je crois que c'est important. On parle souvent du verdissement de la politique agricole commune. Notre politique est verdie ou au moins en voie de verdissement. La deuxième chose, c'est que nous avons posé dans les règlements un principe qui est un principe nouveau, qui est le principe de do no harm, c'est-à-dire ne pas nuire à l'environnement et au climat. C'est-à-dire que pour la nouvelle génération des fonds, aucun investissement ne pourra nuire à ces objectifs. Vous avez posé, et vous êtes du monde du bâtiment et de la construction, le problème des matériaux. Et là, ça renvoie à la question de l'adaptation au réchauffement climatique. Et je pense qu'il ne faut pas être défaitiste. Il y a aujourd'hui des matériaux qui permettent des émissions minimum en carbone, et il faut prendre ce chemin-là. Et à travers les fonds structurels, je pense que le chemin va être amplifié. Voilà. C'est normal.
You have the floor. Yes.
Ja, thank you. Oder vielen Dank. Ich mache jetzt mal auf Deutsch. Vielen Dank. Genau, ich hatte das auch schon mal gelesen, aber nicht parat. Das sind wichtige Prinzipien. Nur als Information. Wir haben, klassisch haben wir Dämmmaterialien im Bau, Asbest, Dämmmaterialien, die nicht gut sind, die heute verwendeten Mineralfaserplatten sind wohl nicht krebserzeugend, aber so haben auch ihre Health Effects, also ihre Gesundheitsauswirkungen. Und mittlerweile gibt es aber holzbasierte Dämmmaterialien. So, das kann man ja auch fördern. Und dann komme ich zu dem Punkt zurück, dass wir oft nicht wissen, was passiert, also was es schon gibt alles an technologischen Innovationen, die dann ja, vielleicht irgendwo produziert werden, aber nicht richtig auf den Markt kommen. Wir hatten das Gleiche bei der Beseitigung von Asbest. Da gibt es in Frankreich von den Präventionseinrichtungen mit den Herstellern organisiert, gibt es eine Reihe von Robotern, die Asbestbeseitigungsarbeiten durchführen. Das heißt, der Beschäftigte ist dann nicht mehr exponiert, nicht mehr an den exponierten Stellen oder so. Aber außerhalb von Frankreich weiß das keiner. Also da müssen wir auch was für tun, dass solche Sachen, die gut laufen, dass die bekannt werden.
Vielen Dank. Gibt es weitere Fragen aus dem maybe from the chat? Gibt es nicht? Dann würde ich an der Stelle das erste Panel schließen und wir kommen jetzt zum zweiten Panel und da gebe ich die Moderation ab an meinen hochgeschätzten Kollegen Papadimoulis. Papadimoulis Dimitris ist Mitglied in unserem Regionalausschuss mit mir gemeinsam und ist gleichzeitig Vizepräsident der Linken im Europäischen Vizepräsident für die Linken im Europäischen Parlament. Herzlich willkommen, Mr. President, können wir sagen. You have the floor, please.
Καλημέρα σας. Με ενημέρωσαν ότι μπορώ να μιλήσω στα ελληνικά. I was informed that I can speak in my mother tongue, so use your headphones. Η συζήτηση στο δεύτερο πάνελ έχει τον τίτλο «Ενεργειακή και μεταναστευτική κρίση, η πολιτική συνοχής στην πρώτη γραμμή», συζήτηση για το REPowerEU, για το Fast Care και για επίγοντα μέτρα. Η συζήτηση στο δεύτερο αυτό πάνελ θα μας δώσει μια εδαφική προσέγγιση της πολιτικής συνοχής και των μέτρων έκτακτης ανάγκης, ιδίως για το REPowerEU. Θέλουμε να δούμε τις προκλήσεις και τις ευκαιρίες αυτών των προτάσεων για την πολιτική συνοχής και τις τοπικές αρχές. Είναι μαζί μας η Ευγένεια Λεάλ Φόντας, ανώτερη πολιτική αναλύτρια πολιτική στη διάσκεψη των περιφερειακών παράκτιων περιοχών, CPMR, και θα μας μιλήσει για την οικονομική πολιτική, τον προϋπολογισμό της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης και την πολιτική συνοχής. Πρόσφατα δημοσίευσε και μια ενδιαφέρουσα μελέτη με θέμα χρηματοδότηση του REPowerEU, μια περιφερειακή οπτική. Πριν από την Ευγένεια θα μιλήσει ο κύριος Rüdiger Lötzer, τοπικός σύμβουλος του LINKE Βερολίνου. Θα τον έχουμε διαδικτυακά. Είναι συνδικαλιστής του IG Metall και θα πάρει το λόγο για να μας μιλήσει για τις προσδοκίες της πολιτικής συνοχής στην τρέχουσα κατάσταση κρίσης από την τοπική αστική σκοπιά. Πριν δώσω το λόγο στους καλεσμένους μας, επιτρέψτε μου να μοιραστώ μαζί σας λίγες σκέψεις. Ο πόλεμος στην Ουκρανία προκάλεσε ένα ντόμινο συνεπειών και προκλήσεων και ανάγκασε την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση να χαράξει νέες πολιτικές, να δημιουργήσει νέα εργαλεία για να αντιμετωπίσει τις συνέπειες αυτού του πολέμου, ανθρωπιστική κρίση, επισιτιστική κρίση, ενεργειακή κρίση. Και μάλιστα σε μια περίοδο που η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση προσπαθεί ακόμη να συνέλθει και να ανακάμψει από τις πολύ μεγάλες αρνητικές κοινωνικές και οικονομικές συνέπειες της πανδημίας. Για μια ακόμη φορά η πολιτική συνοχής βρέθηκε στην πρώτη γραμμή για την αντιμετώπιση δύο από τις σημαντικότερες αρνητικές συνέπειες του πολέμου στην Ουκρανία, που είναι η ενεργειακή κρίση και η ανθρωπιστική κρίση λόγω των διωγγωμένων προσφυγικών ροών. Μιλάμε για εκατομμύρια ανθρώπους. Ήδη με τη δέσμη μέτρων CARE δόθηκε σημαντική συμβολή μέσω πρόσθετης ευελιξίας στα κονδύλια της πολιτικής συνοχής κινητοποιώντας επενδύσεις για στέγαση, υγειονομική περίθαλψη, κατάρτιση για τους εκτοπισμένους κλπ. Το νέο Fast Care προσφέρει ακόμη μεγαλύτερη ευελιξία για την αντιμετώπιση των προκλήσεων που αντιμετωπίζουν οι εκτοπισμένοι από την Ουκρανία. Παράλληλα, στο πλαίσιο του REPowerEU, που τώρα βρίσκεται η πρόταση σε διαπραγμάτευση και με το Ευρωπαϊκό Κοινοβούλιο για την αντιμετώπιση της ενεργειακής κρίσης, η πολιτική συνοχής μπορεί να αποτελέσει δυνητικά μια πρόσθετη πολιτική κονδυλίων για την υλοποίηση εκτάκτων μέτρων από τα κράτη-μέλη. Ποιο είναι όμως το συμπέρασμα που βγαίνει από αυτήν την κατάσταση? Είναι ότι αντί η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση να δημιουργήσει καινούριους πόρους, να αυξήσει τον κοινοτικό της προϋπολογισμό, να αυξήσει τους ίδιους πόρους, να πάρει πιο φιλόδοξα μέτρα, όπως ήταν το Ταμείο Ανάκαμψης και Ανθεκτικότητας, καταφεύγει στα κονδύλια των πολιτικών συνοχής για να χρηματοδοτήσει νέες ανάγκες. Και αυτή η τακτική δεν είναι σωστή, γιατί ξύνοντας τον πάτο του βαρελιού για να βρούμε κονδύλια από τις πολιτικές συνοχής για να καλύψουμε νέες έκτακτες ανάγκες, αποδυναμώνουμε τους ιδρυτικούς και πάγιους στόχους των πολιτικών συνοχής. Οι πολιτικές συνοχής θεσπίστηκαν στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση πολύ πριν από την πανδημία, πολύ πριν από τον πόλεμο στην Ουκρανία, πολύ πριν καν από την οικονομική και κοινωνική κρίση που ξέσπασε το 2008 στις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες και αγκάλιασε όλο τον πλανήτη, για να κάνουν τι? Για να μειώνουν τις ανισότητες κοινωνικές, εδαφικές, περιφερειακές που δημιουργεί η λειτουργία της κοινής αγοράς μέσα στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση. Μέσα σε κάθε κράτος μέλος και ανάμεσα στα κράτη-μέλη. Αυτές οι πολιτικές συνοχής πρέπει όχι να αποδυναμώνονται αιμοδοτώντας νέα εργαλεία, αλλά αντίθετα να ενισχυθούν. Και αυτό είναι μια πάγια θέση της δικής μας ευρωομάδας, της αριστερής ευρωομάδας, αλλά και της μεγάλης πλειοψηφίας της Επιτροπής Περιφερειών που έχουμε τη χαρά και την τιμή να την προεδρεύει ο συνάδελφός μας ο Γιουνούς ο Μαρζή. Εμείς λοιπόν δεν λέμε όχι στην αξιοποίηση κονδυλίων για να αντιμετωπίζονται έκτακτες ανάγκες. Λέμε όμως ότι δεν πρέπει μονίμως η πολιτική συνοχής να είναι ο κουμπαράς, η δεξαμενή, από την οποία θα χρηματοδοτούνται όλες οι έκτακτες ανάγκες. Πρέπει να αυξηθεί ο προϋπολογισμός, πρέπει τα κράτη-μέλη που επωφελούνται από την κοινή αγορά να δώσουν περισσότερα χρήματα, γιατί δεν μπορεί να υλοποιηθούν οι στόχοι που έχουν τεθεί με έναν προϋπολογισμό της τάξης του 1% του ευρωπαϊκού ΑΕΠ. Πρέπει να τροποποιηθεί το MFF, το πολιετές δημοσιονομικό πλαίσιο, και πρέπει να έχουμε πιο φιλόδοξους στόχους για την δημιουργία νέων ίδιων πόρων που θα μειώσουν τις παραδοσιακές εντάσεις ανάμετρα στους net contributors και τους net receivers, δηλαδή τα κράτη κύριους εισφορείς, καθαρούς εισφορείς και τα κράτη καθαρούς δότες. Γιατί η κοινή αγορά δημιουργεί ένα τζίρο και από αυτόν μπορεί και πρέπει η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση να εισπράττει τους δικούς της πόρους. Με αυτές τις σκέψεις, ελπίζω να είναι συνδεδεμένος, θα ήθελα να δώσω το λόγο στον κύριο Λότζερ, τοπικό σύμβουλο του LINKE Βερολίνου και συνδικατιστή της IG Metall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Papadimoulis, and thank you very much for the invitation and greetings from a little bit rainy Berlin. I have made some slices for this meeting, and to start with, I would like to show you the first slice about my personal background. Is that possible? I need it. Yes, there it is. Thank you very much. Please go to the next slice. My personal background is I've been, in my former life, I've been a trade union official from the IG Metall here in Berlin, as it was said before. I'm now a pensioner, but I'm still making some jobs for the IG Metall here on a honorable, without money, making training to labor council members and so on and so far. So I still have a little bit contact with IG Metall policies here in Berlin. That is regional industrial policy and employment policy. And Mr. Papadimoulis, I can tell you, we still have an influx or migration from a number of southern European countries to Berlin, especially young persons coming to Berlin to looking for a job. Just 2 weeks ago, I had a training with the Labor Council in a Berlin factory, and they said the Greeks are taking over our company. They already had 100 persons from Greece working there in their company. This was nearly half the labor force of this company. So we have still this migration team in Berlin too. I'm now working in the local policy as it's shown on this slide. I've been working in as a citizen deputy. Then I was elected as a chairman in the Committee for Social Affairs and Health. A lot to do with Corona. And since 21, where we had the last elections, I'm now chairman of the Committee for Social Affairs, Citizen Services and Housing in Berlin Mitte, just to give you an impression of my personal background, which that you can understand what is my job now here in Berlin. The next slide, please. I know, and I've heard first about the cohesion funds of the European Union, first in connecting with projects supporting homeless people in Berlin, especially homeless women and adolescents, and Sinti and Rom, or Roma, we say in German. Romanian, I think, is the English term. We finance 5 of these projects in Berlin Mitte, in my region, which I personally know. They are financed from the European funds, from local funds, from regional funds of the Land Berlin, and they give washing facilities, sleeping rooms, restrooms, meals, and so on for homeless people. We have a special system in Berlin where we also use some European funds. As far as I know, that is the so-called Berlin Kältehilfe. That is the special support, more rooms for sleeping over the night for homeless people starting from the 1st of October and until the 1st of April every year, just to support people and to prevent them from dying because of the cold when they are sleeping outside. Therefore, they have restrooms where they can wash and sleep during the night. To give you some figures about the situation in Berlin Mitte, I think you can expect it's a little bit not the poorest part of Europe, but we have in a population of about 380 persons living in Berlin Mitte, we had about 3,000 to 4,000 persons living in shelters or being homeless in Berlin. Most of them had come during the refugee crisis, the Syrian crisis in 2015, and they are still living in these shelters, so-called, in German we say Notunterkünfte. These Notunterkünfte are meant normally for people to stay, let's say 2, 3, or 4 weeks until they get a new flat. But the housing situation in Berlin is that critical that some of them are now living, even with their families, with their kids, for 4 or 5 or 6 years even in these shelters. More than 1,000 of them were in 2021, where we had a meeting in our local committees, were kids and adolescents, that is, people living in shelters, and the kids going to school if possible. During Corona, they had no schooling, as you can imagine. A second focus where we have European funding and use European funding are projects in support of Sinti and Rom or Romanis. That is, supporting them in finding a job in Berlin, going to school, sending their kids to schools, finding a flat, washing facility, meals, and so on, and support against specific discriminations, which is a problem for Sinti and Rom, I think, all over the European Union. In the present now, you asked me about what is the situation now in this crisis. The next slide, please. We have now 3 more crisis elements to handle in Berlin, as perhaps everywhere. First, we have a great number of Ukrainian refugees as a consequence of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. The latest figures I've got, and there are still per day sometimes 500 to 1,000 coming to Berlin, so it's a little bit always changing situation. At present, we have about 50,000 Ukrainian refugees living in Berlin and staying, as it looks, for a longer period here in Berlin. 4,000 to 5,000 of them live in Berlin Mitte, that is in our region, and they all need shelter, housing, jobs, schools, medical treatment, and so on and so forth. Second crisis, amongst them are again a growing number of Sinti and Rom coming from the Ukraine. There are a lot of Sinti and Rom living or have been living in the Ukraine, but also from Romania and Bulgaria, which had an inflow of Ukrainian refugees, and therefore the Roma and Sinti sometimes from these countries came to Berlin. And they need a specific need. They have their specific needs and specific discrimination problems, as are well known, that have to be addressed by our systems here in Berlin Mitte. The third crisis element we have to handle is now the inflation problem. We have energy prices here in the region have gone up 40% and more. Food prices, I think the last figure I've got is 16 or 17% more. Rental fees too. As a consequence for this Kältehilfe system, the winter shelter for homeless people, the daily costs for housing these homeless people during the winter period have nearly doubled. Last year, the Berlin government paid for every person about 17 euro per night to give these people a shelter. Nowadays, I've just met a member of the Berlin Abgeordnetenhaus, that is our regional parliament, and he told me that the last figure he had was these costs have gone up to 34 euros, so they have doubled. Next slide, please. As you can see from these figures, we need more money for our local infrastructure, for programs, and so on. Therefore, my first consequence is, and that is not against the to the European Union, but to our regional and our federal government, saying they must leave more money on the local area. It does not make sense in Germany to give tax money to our federal government and then afterwards they send it back to the local area. In our German financial system, the local area needs a greater share of the German tax money. We need additional European money that is welcome, especially in areas with a lower income level. That is for these homeless people, this is for these Roma Sinti people, and for young people, for example, coming from the south of Europe, looking for jobs, losing their job for whatever reason may be, and then they need shelter and support here in Berlin too. Second, money from the European Union funds should, from our perspective, be handed out for long-term programs. if possible 5 years or more. For example, we have a European Union funded project in our community that is a complete hostel or hotel, which is rented by the Stadtmission, that is an organization of the Evangelical Church here in Berlin. They have rented the complete hotel to give 7 days per week, day and night, shelter and food and assistance for homeless people. We will go from our social committee, we will go to this hotel in a few weeks to talk with them about their situation. They are very proud because they say this is a good system, because these homeless people, to bring them back in jobs and in houses and so on, they need long-term assistance, stable surrounding and so on. But the funding, the financing is only safe for this hotel until the end of 24. That is, it started in 22, beginning this year. And it started in 21 and will end in 23. That is a 2-year period. They have the finances, and that's too short for them, as you can understand perhaps, because we already from the local area try now to find other fundings for this hotel project to keep it going for the next 4 to 5 years. Third point I wanted to say is I think long-term investments in social infrastructure, for example, such a hotel, seems for me better than short-term assistance in crisis situation. On the local area, we can react more quickly if we have the money. And the European funding perhaps should be given out or handed out more for long-term projects to give a stable background to infrastructure, social infrastructure projects, for example. Yes, that is, I think, next slide. That is all I wanted to say to you. And I wish you a good conference. And if you have any further question, thank you very much.
Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Νομίζω ότι ήταν μια πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα συμβολή, παρουσίαση, γιατί μετέφερε την εμπειρία της δράσης και των παρεμβάσεων σε τοπικό επίπεδο. Κρατώ τα τελικά συμπεράσματα, τις τελικές παρατηρήσεις του κυρίου Λότζερ, ο οποίος μας είπε ότι πολλά πράγματα μπορούν να γίνουν καλύτερα αν υπάρχουν αρκετοί πόροι διαθέσιμοι σε τοπικό επίπεδο. Θα προσέθετα και αν υπάρχουν οι δομές που να εξασφαλίζουν επαρκή σχέδια, υλοποίησή τους με επαγγελματισμό, με διαφάνεια και κάποιες εγγυήσεις ότι τα χρήματα πάνε σε αυτούς που πραγματικά τα έχουν ανάγκη. Γιατί ένα από τα μεγάλα προβλήματα που έχουμε με την διαχείριση και την αξιοποίηση των ευρωπαϊκών πόρων είναι το έλλειμμα διαφάνειας, τα φαινόμενα διαφθοράς, διασπάθησης δημόσιων πόρων, και εμείς στην αριστερά νομίζω ότι πρέπει να νοιαζόμαστε πολύ παραπάνω για αυτό το θέμα, γιατί τα φαινόμενα διαφθοράς είναι καμιά φορά ένα επιχείρημα και σε όσους θέλουν να περικόψουν τα κοινοτικά κονδύλια ή αρνούνται την αναθεώρηση του MFF και την ενίσχυση των πολιτικών συνοχής. Την διαφθορά την καταπολεμάς ενισχύοντας τους ελέγχους και όχι περικόπτοντας τα κονδύλια και τον κοινοτικό προϋπολογισμό. Νομίζω ότι ήρθε η ώρα να ακούσουμε τη δεύτερη ομιλήτρια αυτού του πάνελ, την κυρία Λεάλ Φόντας. Όπως σας είπα και πρωτήτερα, θα μας μιλήσει για τη χρηματοδότηση του Repower EU και για τις προκλήσεις που σχετίζονται με τον προϋπολογισμό της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ, έχετε το λόγο.
Perfect, thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation today to actually discuss in this very prominent topic on the future of cohesion policy. First of all, I would like to briefly introduce the CPMR for those that you might not know our association. CPMR is the acronym of our Conference of Peripheral Maritime Regions in Europe, and we do represent around 150 regions across Europe, and we represent actually their interest on specific EU policies with really strong territorial impact in order to strive for territorial cohesion. So we can actually go to the first slide, please. My presentation today will focus a lot, and it's on the context of the legislative discussions happening at the European Parliament, also at the REGI committee regarding the REPowerEU, but also on the debate that it's kind of starting at the moment regarding the future of cohesion policy. At the EU level, no, we're always going straight ahead, like even further away, and we're only implementing now at the very beginning of the cohesion policy programs 21-27, but we're already thinking on the future. So as it has been said during this morning, cohesion policy has been at the front line of EU action for the past 5 years. There have been 5 amendments of the package in 2 years. To be honest, at the very beginning, when the COVID pandemic struck, literally, like, cohesion policy was quite praised about how easily it reacted, how effective it was to deploy and to address the unforced emergencies that we faced back in 2020. At the CPMR, a bit more than a half a year ago, we actually also presented a report, a technical note, that we actually thought, like, is it good or bad for cohesion policy, this idea of like being like faced emergencies? For example, one of the things we thought is that back at the time that cohesion policy has always faced a lot of criticism of the lack, of the delay, and we definitely let's say, consider the possibility that back at the time, as cohesion policy had a really, really strong role on facing the COVID pandemic and the consequences of it, we were like, maybe this safe cohesion policy somehow at that time, because there were the negotiations on the MFF, and maybe like some of those member states who are really reluctant on giving more money to cohesion policy, or even keeping the same as it had in the previous programming period, maybe that was a very good safeguard for cohesion policy. But no matter what, and no matter all the changes, and of course, like there's one crisis after the other one, this discussion that we're having now, it should be providing a short-term response to crisis, become a permanent feature of cohesion policy, is definitely one of the questions that we have to have. And I was actually this feature also prominently feature on the informal council of cohesion that happened at the very beginning of the month. And to be honest, a lot of member states actually spoke about it, and gladly, I think there's a general agreement. And this is, I'm going to go straight ahead and not, let's say, be clear and share with you a bit the CPMR answer to this question. We definitely think that cohesion policy should not become an emergency instrument. Cohesion policy should not be a crisis tool. Cohesion policy is a long-term investment policy. And this has to be clear. However, we do think that we have to be in kind of adapt somehow with what's coming up, like in all the debate of the future of cohesion policy. And cohesion policy could still provide a key contribution to address unforeseen events, but always, and that's clear, has to be clear, without losing its strategic focus. So if we go to the next slide, please. So it's true that today we've been discussing about fast care, but I would like to focus for some minutes to the REPowerEU. As at that moment, there's the discussion at the REGI committee and also the other committees involved with the Parliament on where are we going, especially on this, let's say, provision that might allow to transfer money from shared management, like say, cohesion policy, to the Recovery and Resilience Facility to address, let's say, the REPowerEU objectives. In this case, we totally support the statement that was actually led by the REGI committee, the REGI coordinators, the REGI chair some months ago, saying that it's not that we oppose the REPowerEU objectives, but definitely not this idea of transferring money. Especially because if this provision stays as it is, we do think, and we're very concerned of, like, let's say, different consequences that it could have for cohesion policy. On the short term, of course, having this provision would allow, let's say, member states to decide if they use it or not. So far, we've heard that there's not that much appetite from member states to use it, but you never know. The provision would be there, and in the midterm, perhaps, if at one point there might be low absorption of cohesion policy funds from the different member states, maybe they would be tempted to use this possibility and just like transfer money from cohesion policy out of. And well, I mentioned here in the slide, you might see again cohesion policy versus the recovery and resilience facility. This is a bit of another topic, but we've been working a lot in the last years. Now the threat that the facility can harm cohesion policy, especially because they are being implemented in parallel. One of the main objectives of the facility is also to support economic, social, and territorial cohesion in Europe. And second of all, because part of the delays that our cohesion policy 21-27 is facing at the moment is much caused because of the parallel implementation with the facility. And third of all, in the long term, that could be also, these transfers could be a precedent. And maybe we can say that higher transfers could become the norm in the post-27. And this definitely brings us to think like, is cohesion policy at risk? So if we go to the next slide, please. So having said that, and with this idea in mind, is cohesion policy its cohesion policy role to face these emergencies? We do think that somehow this paradigm shift that we've been seeing in the last years is kind of jeopardizing cohesion policy from the inside. I think that with this role of cohesion policy, we're actually promoting the lack of involvement of regional authorities and the absence of territorial dimension of the investment. As REPowerEU as it is, and as just mentioned some minutes ago, is the worrying sign for cohesion policy. The fact that funds can be significantly transferred to other budget lines that are away from cohesion policy features. I mean, the facility is the precedent, and actually the REPowerEU has taken the whole complete, let's say, same structure as it has been ongoing with the facility. So these REPowerEU chapters will have to be discussed at member states in order to be, let's say, defined of. And we saw it with the National Recovery and Resilience Plans at the CPMR. We've been working a lot on this. And I mean, if we can get one, if in a short sentence, I can say the input we received from our members that the lack or even absence of participation and involvement, but also whenever they were able to participate, that was meaningful, less. And second of all, these all the potential flexibilities demands are less stringent application from principles that form the backbone of cohesion policy. Whenever we do five of these flexibilities, like that we lose a bit the partnership principle, the thematic concentration, and also are out of the territorial earmarking. And second of all, another consequence for cohesion policy is the unpredictability of cohesion policy. I mean, as I said before, like 5 amendments of the package in 2 years, it's too much. I mean, this idea has set a precedent, and you never know how the Commission, let's say, could prone and propose key changes to the regulation in the face of any other crisis that might come up in the years to come. But also, like any single potential transfer of funds, from, for example, shared management to the facility in this case, or any other instrument, it involves like more partnership revisions, more program amendments, more administrative burden, and more delays. So definitely, like the situation as it is, it's definitely worrisome for cohesion policy. But we have to work on this and definitely address this topic. So if we go to the next slide. So on the road to cohesion policy post-27, I think that one of the questions is like, how can we tackle not the most pressing current social and economic crisis, while at the same time keeping the strategic goals of cohesion policy in the EU? And it's true that at the very beginning, I was really clear and telling you like a bit the approach that we had at the CPMR, for a while. But at the same time, I think that all of us, like in my case, practitioner, but decision makers, that we work on cohesion policy, we need to be aware that cohesion policy is about to change. Cohesion policy most probably in a post-27 might not be the cohesion policy that we know until now. The extent of the facility, the influence that the facility will have on the future of cohesion policy is unknown, but to our opinion, it surely will. So in this idea, what we think is that we cannot resist the process somehow, and we must embrace it, but always with this idea that all the potential threats become an opportunities for, in this our case, regional authorities, no? That we don't lose the core of cohesion policy on it. And in this, like, there's this little question, like, if the REGI opinion on the Repower EU chapter is the first attempt to address this issue. It's true. There have been not a lot of positioning on the debate at the REGI committee some weeks ago. We were reading the new, let's say, the proposal of the rapporteur. And it's, of course, I would say, it's the idea of transfer is always tricky, but we do consider that if it's discussed at the REGI committee, maybe always keeping in mind that regional authorities have to have a role, and definitely there has to be a territorial, let's say, dimension to it. Without losing the shared management, that could not be a bad option. So, next slide, please. Okay. Again, another very important point coming in the coming years is like the definition of flexibility. We're all talking about flexibility, but which flexibility do we want and to what extent? Do we want the bad flexibility that it's actually the one we can see right now at the Repower EU regulation, this idea of like losing the regional involvement or even the territorial earmark, or we want the one that we consider is the good one, not that flexibility that actually supports more tailor-made interventions and also empowers local authorities, and that flexibility that reduces the burden on administration. In this case, I can say that from our point of view, I think that we really have two main ideas. That's no trade-off of the involvement of regional authorities, no matter if it's on a matter of crisis situation or so on, especially because at the end of the day, regional authorities are the ones who are well aware of the territorial specific needs of the territory. In this case, I mean, the COVID pandemic, for example, had a clear territorial dimension. Same with let's say, the crisis related to the refugees coming from Ukraine at the moment. Not all EU regions are impacted on the same way on it. Second of all, because of the competences that regional authorities have in relation to EU funds on the management, for example, according to their own institutional framework, but some of them, any partnership agreement or operational program that it's actually amended has to have the okay of the region. And third of all, because regional authorities are the best place to coordinate not on all EU funds together with local and national funds, and also in relation to all the strategies at regional level. And second of all, as I mentioned, if we do have to, let's say, reduce this burden on administration in case of potential flexibilities in times of crisis, we need to find the effective simplification and definitely avoid the multiplicity of instruments to set out during crisis. This flexibility has to be already in the package, but also like said that not new things come up, and going back to my first idea that I mentioned, the unpredictability of cohesion policy. So next slide, please. So before ending, I'm very well aware that today I'm actually throwing more questions to you than actually replying them. But we all find ourselves, as it's been said by Mr. at the very beginning of this seminar this morning, this idea that it's a very early stages of the debate. We are all, let's say, assessing. I hope that in a year's time, most probably we will be able to assess the results of all these like emergency instruments that come up, especially also during the pandemic, but the ones that are being negotiated at the moment, and we'll all be able to have a bit more messages in relation. But it's always good also to start already thinking, as I said at the very beginning, on the post-27. I'm bringing another topic here with this slide, but this is also like a point in relation to the whole MFF debate. Like, should there be a crisis management instrument in the EU budget? Let's discuss it in the context of the MFF issue. And second of all, if at the end of the day, the cohesion policy like embraces somehow this emergency crisis flexibility instrument, as we want to call it, we definitely have to think about like where should the balance lie between the long-term and short-term objectives. And second of all, how flexibility and simplification can be introduced without harming the core principles of cohesion policy that from our end, these are the backbone of cohesion policy. These are the ones who have actually show the results of cohesion policy in the 30-year span that it's been existing, and we should definitely not lose it at all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ευχαριστούμε την κυρία Λεάλ Φόντας για την πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα ομιλία της. θα ήθελα να μας στείλει αυτό το PowerPoint, γιατί είμαι και σκιώδης εισηγητής εκ μέρους της ομάδας της αριστεράς για το REPowerEU και θα μου χρειαστούν αυτά που μας παρουσίασε. Νομίζω ότι το καταληκτικό της συμπέρασμα είναι η καρδιά του προβλήματος. Δηλαδή, χρειαζόμαστε καινούργια εργαλεία. Χρειαζόμαστε περισσότερους και καινούριους πόρους στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, έτσι ώστε όταν υπάρχει κάτι επίγον να μην πηγαίνουμε αμέσως στην πολιτική συνοχή και τα κονδύλια της για να θεραπεύσουμε επίγουσες ανάγκες. Φυσικά δεν θα πούμε όχι σε αυτό, αλλά το θέμα είναι να μην αδειάζει και το κουτί που έχει τα κονδύλια για τη συνοχή, γιατί οι ανισότητες αυξάνουν, και οι κοινωνικές και οι περιφερειακές και οι εδαφικές. Και βλέπουμε ότι αυτό γίνεται και πηγή επικίνδυνων και αρνητικών πολιτικών εξελίξεων. Είδατε τι έγινε πριν από λίγες ώρες στην Ιταλία, όπου η ακρίβεια και η φτώχεια και οι ανισότητες εξέθρεψαν την επάνωδο της πιο δεξιάς κυβέρνησης στην ιστορία της Ιταλίας από τον Δεύτερο Παγκόσμιο Πόλεμο και μετά, από την περίοδο του Μουσολίνι και μετά. Άρα και για λόγους κοινωνικούς και για λόγους πολιτικούς χρειάζεται να δούμε την ενίσχυση των πολιτικών των ευρωπαϊκών, τα νέα εργαλεία να είναι κομμάτι του προϋπολογισμού, άρα χρειαζόμαστε ένα τέτοιο instrument μέσα στον προϋπολογισμό, να ενισχυθεί η κεντρική δημοσιονομική ικανότητα της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης και μέσα σε αυτή την προσέγγιση, τον ανασχεδιασμό, όχι μόνο να μην αποδυναμωθούν, εμείς ως ομάδα ζητάμε και να ενισχυθούν οι πολιτικές συνοχής. Ο χρόνος έχει τρέξει αρκετά σε σχέση με το χρονοδιάγραμμα. Αν δεν υπάρχει κάποια ερώτηση, κάποιο αίτημα για παρέμβαση από τους εισηγητές, από τους συμμετέχοντες στην συνάντηση, ενημερώθηκε ότι μας παρακολουθούν και αρκετοί και από το διαδίκτυο. Είναι ελπιδοφόρο αυτό, γιατί η αίθουσα δεν είναι και ιδιαίτερος γεμάτη. Αν δεν βλέπω να υπάρχει κάποιος που να ζητάει το λόγο, θα δώσω λοιπόν το λόγο για τα συμπεράσματα και για το wrap-up της συζήτησης στον αγαπητό συνάδελφο και πρόεδρο της REGI και μέλος της ομάδας μας, το Younous Omarjee.
Merci beaucoup, cher Dimitris. Je ne serai pas très long. Je veux avant tout remercier l'ensemble des intervenants pour leur communication extrêmement intéressante. Et effectivement, comme l'a dit Dimitris, si vous pouvez nous envoyer les slides, cela nous sera très utile dans le travail qui est devant nous. Peut-être une réflexion conclusive. Le thème de notre réunion aujourd'hui, c'est le futur de la cohésion dans un contexte de crise. Et ce thème dit la contradiction et la difficulté qui est la nôtre. Il y a un questionnement aujourd'hui. La politique de cohésion doit-elle répondre aux urgences? Et la réponse aux urgences ne préjudicie-t-elle pas au maintien des objectifs de long terme? Je crois qu'il est très important, comme Dimitris l'a dit, d'affirmer, de réaffirmer que la politique de cohésion est une grande politique d'investissement, une grande politique de solidarité que notre groupe THE LEFT soutient, mais que cette politique de solidarité et d'investissement doit aussi être en capacité d'apporter des réponses à un certain nombre de problèmes immédiats lorsqu'ils se posent. Et c'est la garantie même de son futur. Et c'est la garantie même de son avenir. Lorsque nous avons négocié la programmation 2014-2020, nous étions très loin d'imaginer que la pandémie du Covid allait intervenir. Et lorsque celle-ci est intervenue, elle a frappé tous les pays, elle a frappé en particulier de manière très très rude les pays du Sud. Le 8e rapport de la cohésion nous montre qu'il y a un décrochage des pays du Sud. Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un ici parmi nous et dans notre commission REGI et dans notre groupe THE LEFT qui regrette les mesures d'urgence que nous avons prises pendant la pandémie du Covid-19 en direction en particulier de l'Italie, de l'Espagne, du Portugal, de la Belgique, de la Grèce, de la France? Je crois que non. Bon. Et si nous n'avions pas pris les mesures pour tempérer les impacts de la crise, il était absolument impossible de penser au maintien des objectifs de cohésion pour l'avenir. La deuxième remarque que je veux faire, c'est que les crises sont devenues des donnes permanentes, quasi structurelles, et elles se combinent entre elles. Et nous devons faire face aujourd'hui, mais pas seulement aujourd'hui, nous allons devoir faire face sur toute une programmation à la combinaison de la crise alimentaire, de la crise énergétique, de la crise liée aux catastrophes naturelles et donc au climat, aux crises environnementales, aux crises économiques et peut-être à une crise financière. Donc la crise est une donne permanente et dans cette combinaison de crises, nous devons en permanence avoir pour boussole le maintien des objectifs de cohésion tout en y apportant des réponses. Cela veut dire que la seule politique de cohésion ne peut pas apporter toutes les réponses. On a déjà beaucoup demandé à la politique de cohésion. La politique de cohésion a répondu présente pour tempérer les crises, mais elle ne peut pas être la seule. Et les autres politiques doivent se mettre au diapason et en cohérence avec la politique de cohésion. Ce qui me permet de venir à REPowerEU. La base juridique de REPowerEU, c'est l'article 175 et l'article 122, je crois, 175. Et hier, le Conseil européen, dans une note, un avis juridique, invite les uns et les autres à tenir compte du fait que l'article 175 doit être respecté. Ce qui veut dire que c'est un soutien un peu inattendu pour nous, venant du Conseil, et qui, j'en suis certain, va inspirer toutes celles et tous ceux, rapporteurs fictifs et rapporteurs, qui sont dans le travail pour REPowerEU au Parlement européen. Et je ne veux pas anticiper sur le travail qui sera fait, mais nous devons faire en sorte que les objectifs de la cohésion soient maintenus dans REPowerEU. Mais il est vrai aussi que si nous n'apportons pas de réponse à la crise énergétique, alors il n'y aura pas d'objectif de cohésion satisfait. Je veux aussi faire une remarque par rapport à la présentation de l'étude par Madame la professeure Vera Wegman du Greenwich University concernant la dépendance de l'Union européenne aux énergies fossiles. Cette dépendance est encore extrêmement importante. 35% de la production totale, dit-elle, gaz charbon, et pour le fossile, 60% de dépendance des énergies fossiles pour Malte et Chypre. Je trouve ce chiffre absolument effarant. Pour les îles européennes, il est possible d'atteindre l'autonomie énergétique. Et dans la présentation qui en a été faite, il était souligné qu'il faut plus d'investissements, plus de moyens budgétaires pour la promotion des énergies renouvelables. Eh bien, je crois effectivement, et je pense que c'est une opinion partagée par notre groupe, qu'on n'a pas plus besoin d'argent pour renforcer les équipements sur les énergies fossiles et les réseaux gaziers en particulier, mais on a besoin plus de mobilisation budgétaire à travers le budget de l'Union pour les énergies renouvelables. Et si cette crise peut permettre de booster considérablement des investissements en faveur des énergies renouvelables, alors je pense que nous aurons fait œuvre utile. Et puis retenons également que la libéralisation du marché de l'énergie, en réalité, n'est pas une réponse. Et dans les approches comparées que nous pouvons faire d'ores et déjà, nous voyons que le prix de l'énergie est beaucoup plus bas lorsque le marché est contrôlé, lorsque le marché est régulé. Et cela devrait inspirer la Commission européenne qui est engagée dans une réforme du marché de l'électricité. Et puis pour conclure, je pense que dans la réponse aux crises, notre groupe a mis l'accent sur la nécessité de taxer les profiteurs de guerre et les profiteurs de crise. Nous avons actuellement effectivement des solutions qui consistent à venir piquer de l'argent aux régions et à prendre de l'argent dans le budget européen, mais il faut sans tarder aller prendre de l'argent vers celles et ceux qui se sont enrichis de manière éhontée pendant cette période. Et de nombreuses petites entreprises, les PME, que nous soutenons à travers le FEDER, et en particulier les plus petites d'entre elles, sont en train de fermer, jour après jour. Les objectifs que nous nous sommes fixés à travers de la politique de cohésion sont fragilisés. Nous allons vers une épidémie de fermeture de petites entreprises, en particulier des petites entreprises avec moins de 10 salariés. Nous allons également vers un renforcement des licenciements, quand dans le même temps, des dividendes absolument éhontés et scandaleux sont versés. Alors oui, je veux bien que là encore, la puissance publique entre en action pour protéger ces petites entreprises, et je crois tout de même qu'il y a lieu pour qu'il y ait une justice dans les politiques, qu'on aille aussi taxer ces super profits. Voilà, je crois que le débat a été très intéressant, très riche. Il va nous aider aussi pour travailler à nos propositions. Dimitris est rapporteur pour la commission du budget sur Repower EU. Martina est rapportrice pour fictif pour la commission REGI. Et je suis certain que notre groupe The Left va peser dans les négociations pour que l'on sorte avec les règlements les plus justes et les plus adaptés. Merci aux interprètes également, et un grand merci à Antoine et Nora pour l'organisation de cette journée. Merci beaucoup.